A Mexican mayor and outspoken cartel critic assassinated by a 17-year-old meth addict under the orders of Mexico's most powerful cartel. A powerful mayor in El Salvador accused of hiring out police officers to murder alleged gang members. All of that and much more on this week's edition of Organized Crime News Weekly. Stunning allegations have been leveled against a powerful politician in El Salvador, close to controversial Salvadorian President Nayib Bukele. These allegations have come to light in what is known as the Guacamaya leaks, when an anonymous hacking group back in 2022 released 25 terabytes of data from military and law enforcement agencies across several Latin American countries, exposing many acts of corruption related to these bodies. One of the items leaked from this hack that has just now come to light is a 220-page confession from a former Salvadorian police officer, only known under the codename of Horace. Horace confessed that between 2015 and 2020, he participated in at least 97 murders as part of a hit team made up of other police officers known as Halcon 39, and that Salvador Menendez, the mayor of the city of La Paz Oeste, paid him for 36 of those killings. Menendez is a member of the ruling Ghana Party and is a self-described friend and ally of President Bukele, supposedly having personally financed one of Bukele's presidential campaigns. In March of 2022, President Bukele launched a massive crackdown against gangs across El Salvador, which continues to this day. For decades prior, El Salvador had been one of, if not the most murderous countries in the world. In 2015, the country had a rate of approximately 106 homicides per 100,000 people, with 6,656 murders occurring that year in a country which at that time only had a population of a little over 6 million people. And these murders came against the backdrop of infamous gangs such as MS-13 and the 18th Street Gang, which have now become notorious all across the world, especially in America, where right-wing politicians often like to use them as boogeymen. But in El Salvador, they have wreaked havoc, extorting various small business owners across the country, as well as some major companies. In the past, they've even gone so far as attacking buses and setting them aflame when the bus companies refuse their extortion demands. And since Bukele's crackdown starting in 2022, both of these gangs have seen a rapid decline. Bukele's crackdown has seen the murder rate across El Salvador drop by approximately 98% by 2024, according to some sources. However, with this massive crackdown came many downsides, as over 89,000 individuals, many of whom are not even gang members, have been arrested and placed into the country's overcrowded prisons with no due process and can be held indefinitely. President Nayib Bukele has been accused of taking El Salvador into a very authoritarian direction in order to combat the gangs, while many criticize him for taking away Salvadorian civil liberties. Many praise him for the fact that he has managed to decrease the violence across the country so dramatically that it almost doesn't even exist, at least compared to what it used to be. He's also become a controversial figure lately for taking deported Americans into his prisons, despite some of them not even being from El Salvador. And the prisons in El Salvador are considered to be very atrocious, even by Latin American standards, with overcrowding and constant neglect, with some individuals having not even committed any crimes, but due to suspicions they are labeled as gang members and thrown into these prisons indefinitely. Horace's claims came amidst the run-up to this massive crackdown starting. Horace claimed that Mayor Salvador Menendez, between 2015 and 2020, provided him and others with vehicles and weapons to carry out killings of gang members, and that he typically paid between $1,000 per hit for a total of about $27,500 for the 36 killings Menendez was linked to between 2015 and 2018. The targets for the killings, supposedly ordered by Menendez, mainly targeted gang members, with Horace claiming that in February 2016, Menendez ordered him and other officers to decapitate 2 gang members and place their heads at the entrance of La Paz Oeste, the city that Menendez is the mayor of, in an effort to portray the town as being extremely violent in a scheme to obtain more government funding. News organization El Faro was able to verify at least 10 cases that Horace alludes to, and it appears that the case of decapitation just mentioned regards two alleged MS-13 members known as Blazer and Burrow who were decapitated. Horace also documented numerous other cases where police officers kidnapped individuals, took them out to sugarcane fields, and executed them before placing weapons on their body as if to appear that they had died in a shootout. In addition to the killings allegedly ordered by Mayor Menendez, Horace shed some light on the 2020 murder of Catholic priest Ricardo Antonio Cortez of Santiago de Maria, who was gunned down while driving to a seminary by numerous individuals that included police officers. Horace claims that this killing was ordered by an individual only known as Chapon, who was said to have strong ties to Mexican cartels. According to Horace, many of the victims of the police hit squad were not gang members. One such victim was a prosecutor who had been investigating the officers for the murder of the four men. However, the hit would never be carried out as the officers were released and cleared of any charges. Horace and three other members of Halcon 39 were finally arrested in August of 2020 for the murders of 18-year-old Andres Alexander Guardado Asensio and 17-year-old Kevin Alexander R., who were arrested as they were taken off a bus on their way home from school. They were then taken to a different location where one of them was suffocated with a nylon string and the other was shot in the back. This was all just because an informant had identified both of the murdered teens as extortionists without much evidence to back it up. It was after being arrested for these murders that Horace decided to become a cooperating witness against his fellow officers, and in December 2020, the three other cops were sentenced to a combined 180 years of imprisonment on charges of forced disappearance and aggravated homicide. In Horace's confession, Mayor Menendez was mentioned 141 times, but he was not indicted for any murders. The case that saw these three police officers convicted of murder was initiated back in 2018 under then Attorney General of El Salvador, Raul Malara, who at that time was investigating corruption allegations tied to the Bukele administration. When the sentences for the three cops were handed down in December 2022, Bukele had already purged El Salvador's judicial system and replaced them with judges loyal to him, which was the first true sign that his government was taking El Salvador down an authoritarian route. Then Attorney General Malara was also sacked and replaced as Attorney General. And just this past week, Fernando Meneses, the defense lawyer of the three cops convicted, revealed to news outlet El Faro that after the sentencing in December 2022, only one of the defendants had been detained. I can't honestly say I'm surprised by this story because the Bukele administration has for a while now been carrying out shady activities in order to combat what they say is gang activity, but often can be political dissenters or anyone who has uncovered any corruption of the Bukele administration. The fact that these murders predate the start of Bukele's crackdown in 2022 makes me think that things like these are still being carried out, but they haven't come to light yet, especially considering how much more aggressively they're targeting gang members than when these murders were carried out by Horace and the other police officers operating as a hit squad for Menendez. As I said earlier, President Bukele is very controversial because on one hand, he's accused of being a corrupt despot who has turned El Salvador into an authoritarian country that is willing to lock up anybody who they deem as a gang member despite no evidence, as well as the silencing of journalists who report on these activities. And on the other, many across El Salvador revere him for the fact that he has managed to make El Salvador a much safer country as far as everyday people not being extorted by gangs such as MS-13 and the 18th Street Gang. While to me, that's a good thing for the people of El Salvador, to me, it's tragic that they had to sacrifice their civil liberties and whatever rights they had just to get rid of their gang problem. If you ask me, that's not really worth it, but if you ask someone from El Salvador, they might disagree with me on that. I doubt that Mayor Salvador Menendez will ever face any serious charges for these allegations, considering that he is a close ally of President Bukele, and President Bukele, in turn, is a strong ally of the Trump administration, and I think it's pretty safe to say that the Trump administration would be willing to look the other way when allegations like these arise against one of their key allies in the region. But a perfect story that illustrates the shady tactics used in El Salvador's war on gangs. And I'm sure many other activities like these are still ongoing, but have yet to surface. And more stories like this are sure to come out in the future. On the night of Saturday, November 1st, 41-year-old Yannis Lawless was hanging out at his chalet in the middle of the forest in the city of Arkova in Greece when he received a phone call. He then went out on the balcony of the chalet and was promptly mowed down and struck by 12 rounds from an automatic weapon to his head, chest, and abdomen. Lawless's girlfriend, who was with him at the time, immediately contacted the police, and she told the police that she saw the shooters running through the woods and that they were dressed in black and had their faces covered. However, by the time the police arrived, Lawless was dead from his many wounds. Soon after, a burnt-out Jeep was found nearby that is believed to have been used by the shooters in the getaway. Police believe that there were 3 individuals involved in the attack, as in the burnt-out Jeep they found an AK-47 along with 2 9mm pistols. And now some background on the murdered man, Yannis Lawless, also known as the bodybuilder or the cook, allegedly due to his ability to cook and set traps for his rivals. Yannis Lawless was a notorious figure in the Greek underworld for many years. Just this past May, he survived an assassination attempt in the city of Ano, Laodicea, outside a gas station he owned. He escaped with his life by shielding himself in his armored car, which was struck by more than 40 bullets. Lawless, along with his brother, were previously accused of being behind the murder of journalist George Karibos. George Karibos was a Greek investigative journalist who specialized in organized crime. In April of 2021, he was gunned down near his home in Athens by 2 helmeted men on a scooter. Lawless and his brother were arrested and charged with his murder, but were later acquitted in July of 2024 due to a lack of evidence. In addition, Lawless was a suspect in the 2021 murder of boxer and underworld figure Haris Kontogeorgis, who was shot dead outside a gym with an AK-47. Lawless was at the center of the ongoing conflict between indigenous Greek mobsters and a group made up primarily of gangsters from the former Soviet Union. He was aligned with a group made up of former Soviets and was believed to have been the right-hand man of the mysterious and shadowy figure, only known as Entik, who is believed to have orchestrated much of the violence in this gang war. While at this time Entik's name is unknown to the general public, he is said to be a Georgian who lives in Dubai, where he is allegedly under house arrest. But despite that, he's able to orchestrate all these violent acts back in Greece and is a key player in Greece's underworld. As I said, he is thought to be in charge of the Russian-speaking mob operating in Greece. Entik and his gang are heavily involved in cigarette smuggling, extortion, blackmail, and fuel smuggling. The gang is said to produce cigarettes in illegal factories and warehouses throughout Greece that are said to have cost Greece approximately 9 million euros in lost tax revenue. Entik's group is said to be responsible for 5 murders committed against homegrown Greek mobsters that have occurred since 2022, the most recent one being the murder this past spring of powerful Greek mobster George Mashoros, whom Lawless is believed to have once been a partner of. Entik is thought to be trying to eliminate the Greek mafia to consolidate his grip on the illicit markets, particularly in Athens and the island of Mykonos, which are big tourist destinations with attractive nightlife scenes that offer lucrative rewards for these criminal groups in the form of protection money. In addition to these 5 murders, Entik is also believed to have been behind the murder just last month of Cypriot businessman and underworld figure Stavros Demosthenes, who was gunned down while traveling with his 18-year-old son by 2 men on a motorcycle. Demosthenes was the president of the Cypriot 2nd Division soccer club Karmiotissa FC, and he was rumored to be involved in helping Russian oligarchs launder their money in Cyprus, as well as putting pressure on their rivals. So Entik has been very active lately, not just in Greece, but in Cyprus, where he is also believed to have ongoing criminal activities. And now he has even managed to take out one of Cyprus's most powerful mobsters. But back to Lawless, the murdered man. In September 2024, while incarcerated in the Korydallos prison, he assaulted another inmate by the name of Panagiotis Vlastos, a powerful figure within the so-called Greek mafia. Lawless allegedly carried out this assault on the order of Entik's gang. This assault on Vlastos is being looked at as a likely motive for Lawless's murder. Vlastos came out of prison sometime in the last year, and in addition to being suspected of carrying out Lawless's murder this past week, he's also suspected of being behind the failed attempt on Lawless's life in May when his armored car was shot up. But another murder in this war between the Greek mafia and the so-called Russian mafia in Greece that has seen numerous murders the past several years in what is a very underreported underworld conflict. I think it's fascinating that you have this conflict between Greeks and Russians to take control of the Greek underworld. And then there's also other factors such as the Turkish gangs, such as the Daltons and the Caspers that I've talked about many times before. They also have a strong presence in Greece and have contributed to much of the violence in the Greek underworld in recent years as well. Greece has really become a powder keg for different criminal factions made up of different ethnicities competing to control all the illicit activities. Even though the Russian-speaking group led by Entic seems to be winning this war at the moment, the Greek mafia is able to strike back every so often, as is the case with Giannis Lawless this past week. I'm interested to see where this war goes because despite Entic continually taking out members of the Greek mafia to where now it is pretty much a diminished force, they still manage to strike back every so often. But in the end, I think that the connections that Entic has all across the Mediterranean and the former Soviet bloc will see him prevail, and he will gain an even stronger foothold in the Greek underworld. As the homegrown Greek mafia continues to fall apart as they face off Turkish gangs and the Russian-speaking mob led by the mysterious but increasingly powerful Entic. On Saturday, November 1st at 8 p.m., Carlos Manzo, the mayor of the town of Uruapan in the Mexican state of Michoacan, was attending the city's Day of the Dead festival. While socializing with other attendees of the festival, a gunman approached him and opened fire, hitting him 7 times in the back, abdomen, and arm. Also shot in the attack were Victor Hugo de la Cruz, a member of the Uruapan City Council, along with Manzo's bodyguards. Manzo was immediately rushed to a nearby hospital where he would eventually die from his wounds. After shooting Manzo, the gunman was then promptly shot and killed by Manzo's bodyguards. He was soon identified as 17-year-old Victor Manuel Ubaldo Vidalis from the city of Paracho. Ubaldo Vidalis was a known meth addict and had been reported missing by his family 8 days prior to his shooting. Just 4 hours before the shooting, he had checked into a hotel right across from the plaza where the festival was to occur. It was also determined that the 9mm pistol used by Ubaldo Vidalis in the shooting was used in 3 other murders that occurred in Uruapan just this past October. It was later announced by the authorities that 2 other individuals were arrested in connection with Manzo's assassination. Now a little bit about the murdered mayor, Carlos Manzo. He had only just become the mayor of Uruapan last year when he was elected as an independent. Before that, he had been a deputy for the Morena Party in the area, the Morena Party being the ruling party in Mexico. Recently, he had become a vocal critic of many of the drug cartels operating in Uruapan, which includes the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, the Knights Templar Cartel, and the United Cartel, amongst others. Manzo was a frequent critic of former Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador's policy of hugs, not bullets, in which Obrador sought to have more dialogue with the cartels rather than just going after them with brute force. Manzo was a strong proponent of attacking the cartels, and prior to his death, he constantly requested aid from Obrador's successor and current Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum for assistance in combating the cartels. He often accompanied police in high-profile raids and arrests targeting cartel affiliates, and had even taken to wearing a bulletproof vest at all times due to his combativeness against the cartels. He was assigned around-the-clock protection in the form of 14 National Guard soldiers. The state of Michoacan, where Uruapan is located, has been the scene of some of the most brutal battles between Mexican cartels over the past 2 decades, ever since the Mexican government declared war on the drug cartels. And the groups I just mentioned, such as the CJNG and other groups, such as La Familia Michoacana, have long fought to dominate the state. In the past 3 years alone, 7 mayors of various cities across Michoacan and more than 60 municipal officials have been assassinated. While much of the violence in Michoacan is obviously linked to the drug trade, such as the trafficking of fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine, much of the violence is centered around the extortion of citrus and avocado growers, which has been a unique characteristic of the state of Michoacan, where farmers throughout the state are forced to pay fees to the cartels to operate and are often murdered if refusing to give in to the extortion demands. And Michoacan in particular is the source of much of the avocados that are sold across the United States. So for anyone listening, if you buy an avocado, just be aware that in order for that avocado to reach you, a farmer in Michoacan had to pay an extortion fee to a drug cartel. Just last month, Bernardo Bravo, president of the Apatzingan Valley Citrus Producers Association, was found shot to death in his car after he repeatedly denounced the cartels and their extortion. At this time, it is believed that the CJNG are likely responsible for Monzo's assassination, as they were the main targets of his online rants against cartels. Monzo had constantly resisted efforts from the CJNG to gain influence over the city's departments, such as the police and public works. And just this past August, the CJNG's plaza boss in Arapan, Rene Belmonte, or El Reno, was arrested, and Monzo bragged about the capture of El Reno in a Facebook post. El Reno was in charge of the CJNG's extortion against produce growers in Arapan, as the city is one of the top cultivators of avocados in the region. And this arrest of El Reno in particular is said to have increased violence in the state of Michoacan that led to the murders of Bernardo Bravo and Carlos Monzo. One of the men who was arrested for Monzo's murder in the immediate aftermath was Osvaldo Gutierrez Velasquez, who is a relative of Omar Farias Chavez, a known operative of the CJNG out of the Michoacan city of Apatzingan, who is closely linked to the Alvarez Ayala brothers, who in turn are thought to be very closely affiliated with Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, or El Mencho, top leader of the CJNG. Also, it was determined that the three murders linked to the pistol used by the 17-year-old shooter were carried out by the CJNG, and that the 17-year-old meth addict was seen as expendable by the CJNG, who exploited him despite knowing that the chances of him making it out alive were slim to none. In the immediate aftermath of Carlos Monzo's murder, his wife, Grecia Quiros Garcia, has since become the mayor of Arapan. It's not shocking that an outspoken mayor like Carlos Monzo would be assassinated by a drug cartel. As I pointed out earlier, this has happened many times before, and it has already happened a few times this past year alone. I think incidents like these kind of show why so many Mexican politicians and police officers are willing to look the other way regarding Mexican cartel activities and often are fully complicit in their criminal activities. The Mexican cartels have gained so much power across the whole country in the past couple decades that there is very little protection for people who speak out against them. And this in turn makes many of these corrupt public officials unwilling to buck the system that they know favors the cartels over law and order. It seems that Carlos Monzo didn't care, and because of this, he had to pay for his life. It's especially ballsy that he was doing this in Michoacan, which is one of, if not the most dangerous states as far as cartel violence in Mexico, due to the fact that multiple drug cartels are constantly at war with each other in the state, and it's been that way for almost 20 years now. The fact also that he was murdered by the CJNG is not surprising at all, considering that the CJNG are the most brazen of the current drug cartels operating and the most willing to carry out violent acts against public officials. This also comes at a time when the CJNG is arguably now the most powerful Mexican drug cartel after the fracturing of the Sinaloa cartel. To me, it's also suspicious that the 17-year-old meth addict gunman was able to get to Monzo despite 14 National Guard soldiers being around him. There's always the possibility of some complicity by the National Guard in Monzo's murder, as the CJNG would be more than capable of willing to buy off some of them, but that's just a theory on my part. But the murder of Carlos Monzo is another loss for Mexico's war on its drug cartels, which long ago was lost. And at this point, as the cartels continue to expand all across Mexico with the CJNG leading the way, the bodies will only continue to pile up as the government continues to be unable to contain the threat within. All right, that's going to do it for this week's edition of Organized Crime News Weekly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Just want to remind everyone to please like, share, and subscribe so we can help grow this channel. Also, please make sure to support my channel. You can do that by just contributing $2.99 a month. Any contribution is greatly appreciated, and it helps me to continue making these videos. I'll be back next week to report on more stories concerning the global criminal underworld. Thank you so much for tuning in.